The telegram arrived on a Tuesday morning in June of 1882, and Emma Louise Turner knew before she even opened it that her life was about to change in ways that made her stomach twist with dread. She stood in the parlor of her aunt's modest house in St. Louis, her fingers trembling as she unfolded the yellow paper. The words swam before her eyes, but their meaning was clear enough. Her father had finalized the arrangement. In 3 weeks, she would travel west to the Arizona Territory to marry Luther Blackthorne, a wealthy mine owner twice her age whom she had met exactly once when she was 16 years old. The memory of that meeting still made her skin crawl. He had looked at her the way a man might examine a horse he was considering purchasing, his pale eyes lingering on her body in a way that made her want to scrub herself clean. His hands, when he had taken hers in greeting, had been cold and damp, and his smile had never reached those calculating eyes. Emma was 22 now, old enough to be considered nearly a spinster by some standards, and her father had lost patience with her refusals of the various suitors who had come calling over the years. The telegram made it clear this was not a request or even a discussion. It was a command. Her passage had already been arranged. Luther Blackthorne had sent the money for her journey, along with a substantial payment to her father. She had been sold, pure and simple, though no one would ever use such crude language to describe it. Her Aunt Margaret found her an hour later, still standing in the same spot, the telegram clutched in her hand. The older woman took one look at Emma's ashen face and gathered her into her arms without a word. When Emma finally managed to speak, her voice came out small and frightened in a way that shamed her. "I cannot do this, Aunt Margaret. I cannot marry that man. There is something wrong about him, something that frightens me down to my bones." Her aunt held her tighter, and Emma felt the older woman's tears dampening her hair. "I know, sweet girl, I know. But your father holds all the cards. You have no money of your own, no means of supporting yourself. If you refuse, he will cut you off entirely, and you know he means it." Emma did know it. Her father was a hard man who saw daughters as assets to be managed and eventually disposed of to his best advantage. She had 3 younger sisters still at home, and her refusal to marry well had become an embarrassment to him. This arrangement with Luther Blackthorne solved multiple problems at once. It brought him money, connections to the lucrative mining operations in the Arizona Territory, and it removed his troublesome eldest daughter from his household. The next 3 weeks passed in a blur of preparations that felt more like planning for a funeral than a wedding. Emma moved through the days in a state of numb resignation, allowing her aunt to pack her trunks with the trousseau that had been purchased with Luther's money. Everything was expensive and fine, but Emma felt no pleasure in the silk dresses and lace undergarments. They felt like the trappings of her cage, beautiful bars that would hold her prisoner for the rest of her life. The journey west was long and exhausting. Emma traveled by train from St. Louis to Albuquerque, and from there she was to take a stagecoach south into the Arizona Territory. Her father had not come to see her off, sending only a curt note reminding her of her duty. Her aunt had wept openly on the platform, pressing a small leather pouch into Emma's hands at the last moment. "It is not much," Margaret had whispered urgently, "but it is all I have been able to save. $50. Hide it well and tell no one. If you ever need to run, you will have something to start with." Emma had hidden the pouch in the false bottom of her smallest trunk, the one that held her most personal belongings. She did not know if she would ever be desperate enough to use it, but the knowledge that it was there provided a small measure of comfort during the long, uncomfortable journey. The stagecoach from Albuquerque was crowded and hot, the air thick with dust that worked its way into every crease of clothing and every breath. Emma sat wedged between an enormously fat drummer who smelled of sweat and cheap cologne, and a thin woman in widow's weeds who never spoke a word to anyone. Across from them sat two miners heading back to their claims, and a lone cowboy who had boarded the stage at the last minute. It was the cowboy who caught Emma's attention, though she tried not to stare. He was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and dark hair that curled slightly beneath his worn hat. His eyes, when he glanced her way, were a startling shade of gray-green, like the sage that dotted the landscape outside the coach windows. He had a quiet, watchful quality about him, and unlike the other men in the coach, he did not try to engage her in conversation or stare at her with open curiosity. He simply tipped his hat to her in polite greeting when their eyes met, and then returned his attention to the passing scenery. His name, she learned from the driver when they stopped to change horses, was Grant Quincy, and he worked as a ranch hand on one of the cattle operations north of Clifton. He was heading home after delivering a herd to the railhead in New Mexico. The driver spoke of him with clear respect, noting that Grant was known as a man who could be counted on, someone who kept his word and did not back down from trouble when it found him. Emma found herself stealing glances at Grant throughout the journey, drawn to the quiet competence he projected. His hands, she noticed, were scarred and calloused from hard work, but they were clean, and he handled things with a gentleness that surprised her. When the stage hit a particularly rough patch of road and she was nearly thrown from her seat, it was his hand that shot out to steady her, his grip firm but careful. "You all right, madam?" he asked, his voice low and rough in a way that did something strange to her insides. "Yes, thank you," she managed, acutely aware of the warmth of his hand on her arm even through the fabric of her sleeve. He released her immediately and settled back into his seat, but she caught him watching her several times after that, his expression thoughtful. She wondered what he saw when he looked at her. Did he see the fear she was trying so hard to hide? Could he sense that she was traveling towards something that terrified her? They reached Clifton on a scorching afternoon in late June. The town was rough and raw, carved out of the harsh Arizona landscape where the San Francisco River cut through copper-rich mountains. The mining operations dominated everything, the stamp mills running day and night with a constant thunder that Emma could feel in her chest. The town itself was a jumble of buildings that ranged from substantial brick structures to ramshackle wooden affairs that looked like they might blow away in a strong wind. Dust hung in the air like a veil, and the heat was oppressive, unlike anything Emma had experienced in Missouri. Luther Blackthorne was waiting for her at the stage office, and Emma felt her blood run cold when she saw him. He had aged in the 6 years since their first meeting, his face harder and his body thicker. But it was his eyes that frightened her most, that flat, assessing stare that stripped away her defenses and left her feeling exposed and vulnerable. He looked at her the way a predator might regard prey, with a hunger that had nothing to do with love or even desire. It was about possession, about power. "Miss Turner," he said, taking her hand before she could pull away, "you are even more beautiful than I remembered. I am a fortunate man." His hand was still cold and damp, and Emma had to force herself not to yank her fingers from his grasp. "Mr. Blackthorne," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "We will be married tomorrow," he continued, as if she had not spoken. "I have made all the arrangements. Your things will be brought to my house, where you will stay tonight in the guest room. Mrs. Chen, my housekeeper, will look after you." Emma wanted to protest, to demand more time, but the words stuck in her throat. She was aware of the people watching them, including Grant Quincy, who had retrieved his saddle from the boot of the stage and was standing near his horse. The cowboy's expression was carefully neutral, but she saw the way his jaw tightened when Luther took her arm in a grip that was just a shade too tight to be comfortable. Luther's house was one of the finest in Clifton, a substantial two-story structure with a veranda that wrapped around 3 sides. It should have been impressive, but to Emma it felt like a prison. The rooms were dark and oppressively furnished, heavy drapes blocking out the harsh sunlight and creating an atmosphere of gloom. Mrs. Chen was a tiny Chinese woman with a weathered face and sad eyes who spoke very little English. She showed Emma to a bedroom on the 2nd floor and helped her unpack with gentle efficiency. But Emma noticed the way the housekeeper flinched whenever Luther's voice boomed from somewhere below. That night, Emma lay awake in the unfamiliar bed, listening to the distant thunder of the stamp mills and trying not to give in to the panic that clawed at her chest. She thought about her aunt's parting gift, the $50 hidden in her trunk. Was it enough to get away? Where would she go? She had no skills, no way to support herself in this harsh country. Women alone did not survive long in places like Clifton. She must have finally dozed off near dawn, because she woke to bright sunlight streaming through the window and Mrs. Chen gently shaking her shoulder. The housekeeper had brought breakfast on a tray, but Emma could not eat. Her stomach was twisted in knots, and her hands shook when she tried to lift the cup of tea. "No, Mary," Mrs. Chen said suddenly, her broken English startling Emma. The older woman touched her arm, her eyes urgent. "Bad man." "You know, Mary." Emma felt tears spring to her eyes. "I have no choice," she whispered. "I have nowhere to go, no one to help me." Mrs. Chen looked like she wanted to say more, but the sound of Luther's footsteps on the stairs sent her scurrying from the room. Emma was left alone to dress in the traveling suit that would serve as her wedding dress. Her hands fumbled with the buttons, and she had to stop several times to wipe away tears. This was her wedding day, but there was no joy in it, only a suffocating sense of dread. The ceremony was to be held at Luther's house, with the justice of the peace coming to perform the service. A handful of Luther's business associates would serve as witnesses. Emma descended the stairs at the appointed time, feeling like she was walking to her execution. Luther was waiting in the parlor, dressed in a suit that must have cost a fortune but did nothing to soften his predatory appearance. The justice of the peace was a weary-looking man with a book already open in his hands, clearly eager to complete this transaction and move on to other business. Emma stood beside Luther, her body rigid with tension as the justice began to drone through the ceremony. She felt separate from her body, as if she was watching this happen to someone else. This could not be her life. This could not be happening. If anyone has reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace. It was a formality, words that were always said but never acted upon. No one ever actually objected at a wedding. Emma had already opened her mouth to speak her vows when the front door opened with a bang that made everyone in the room jump. Grant Quincy stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands and his expression determined. "I object," he said clearly, his gray-green eyes fixed on Emma. "This woman is already married. To me." The room erupted in chaos. Luther's face turned a mottled red, and he lunged toward Grant with a roar of fury. The justice of the peace stumbled backward, and the assembled guests began talking all at once. Emma felt the blood drain from her face. What was Grant doing? This made no sense. They had barely spoken. They were not married. This was insane. Grant did not flinch as Luther bore down on him. "I have the papers right here," he said, pulling a folded document from his jacket. "We were married 3 months ago in Santa Fe. I have been working up north and only just learned that Emma was here. When I heard she was about to marry another man, I came as quick as I could." Luther snatched the papers from Grant's hand and scanned them with shaking hands. Emma could not see what was written there, but whatever it was, it looked official enough to give Luther pause. The mine owner's eyes narrowed to slits. "This is a forgery, a cheap trick." "It is registered with the territorial government," Grant said calmly. "You can send a telegraph to verify if you like, but it will take time. In the meantime, Emma is my wife, and she is coming with me." He looked at Emma then, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It was a silent plea, a question. He was offering her a way out, but she had to take it. She had to trust him. Emma did not understand what was happening or how Grant had managed to produce papers that looked genuine enough to fool even Luther temporarily. But she knew with absolute certainty that this was her only chance. If she did not take Grant's hand right now, she would be trapped with Luther forever. She took a step toward Grant, then another. Luther's hand shot out and grabbed her wrist, his fingers digging in hard enough to bruise. "You are not going anywhere," he hissed. Grant's whole demeanor changed in an instant. The calm cowboy vanished, replaced by something far more dangerous. His hand moved to the gun at his hip, not drawing it but making his intent clear. "Let her go," he said, his voice soft but edged with steel. "Right now." One of Luther's associates, a bulky man with the look of hired muscle, stepped forward. But the justice of the peace, who had been watching this entire scene with growing alarm, held up his hand. "Now see here, if there is a prior marriage, this ceremony cannot proceed. Mr. Blackthorne, I suggest you release the lady until this matter can be properly investigated." Luther's grip tightened for a moment, and Emma saw fury and something darker flash across his face. Then he shoved her away from him with enough force that she stumbled. Grant was there instantly, his arm catching her and steadying her. He positioned himself between Emma and Luther, his body a shield. "This is not over," Luther said, his voice shaking with rage. "I will have the truth of this, and when I prove you are a liar and a fraud, I will see you hanged." "I reckon we will let the law sort it out," Grant said evenly. He looked down at Emma, his expression gentle despite the tension radiating through his body. "Get your things, Emma. We are leaving." Emma rushed upstairs, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. Mrs. Chen was already in the bedroom, pulling items from the wardrobe with frantic efficiency. "Go, go," the older woman urged, pressing a bundle of clothes into Emma's arms. Go now." Emma grabbed her smallest trunk, the one with her most personal belongings and her aunt's hidden gift. Mrs. Chen helped her carry it down the stairs, where Grant took it from them without a word. Luther stood in the parlor doorway, surrounded by his associates, his face a mask of cold fury. Emma did not look at him as she hurried past. She was terrified that if she met his eyes, she would lose her nerve. Grant had a horse waiting outside, a sturdy bay gelding that stood patiently as he secured Emma's trunk behind the saddle. Then he turned to her, and for the first time she saw uncertainty flicker across his face. "Can you ride?" "Yes," Emma said, though it had been years since she had been on a horse. "Good. Because we need to put some distance between us and Clifton before Luther has time to think too hard about those papers." He helped her into the saddle, his hands careful and respectful, and then swung up behind her. Emma had never been so close to a man before, pressed back against his chest with his arms around her to hold the reins. She could feel the heat of his body through their clothes, smell the scent of leather and sage and clean sweat. It should have frightened her, but instead she felt safer than she had in weeks. They rode out of Clifton at a steady pace that would not draw attention, but as soon as they were clear of the town, Grant urged the horse into a gallop. They rode north, following a path that wound through hills studded with juniper and scrub oak. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly, but Emma barely noticed the heat. Her mind was reeling, trying to process what had just happened. After an hour of hard riding, Grant finally slowed the horse and guided it off the main path into a narrow canyon where a small spring provided water and shade. He dismounted first and then helped Emma down, his hand steadying her when her legs threatened to give out. She had not realized how hard she was shaking until her feet were on solid ground. "Are you all right?" Grant asked, his gray-green eyes searching her face with concern. Emma opened her mouth to answer, but instead of words, what came out was a sob, then another. And then she was crying in earnest, great gasping sobs that she could not control. Grant did not try to touch her or calm her. He simply stood nearby, a quiet presence, until the storm of emotion finally passed. When she could breathe again, he handed her a handkerchief without comment. "I am sorry," Emma managed, wiping at her face. "I do not understand what just happened. Those papers, were they real? Are we actually married?" Grant looked uncomfortable. "No, madam, we are not married. Those papers were a forgery, though a good one. I have a friend who is skilled at such things." "The document looks real enough to fool most people at a glance, but it would not hold up to serious scrutiny. Luther Blackthorne will figure that out eventually, probably within a day or two." Emma felt the ground shift beneath her feet. "So you lied. You committed fraud to stop that wedding." "Yes, madam, I did," Grant said steadily, meeting her gaze without flinching. "And I would do it again. I saw your face when you got off that stage yesterday. I saw how you looked at Blackthorne, like you were staring at your own death. No woman should have to marry a man who scares her like that." "But why?" Emma asked, her voice breaking. "You do not know me. Why would you risk so much for a stranger?" Grant was quiet for a long moment, his eyes distant. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. "I had a sister once, Eliza. She was promised to a man when she was 18, a wealthy rancher friend of my father's. She tried to tell everyone that he frightened her, that something was wrong, but no one would listen. They said she was being foolish, that he was a good match. She married him because she had no choice." He paused, swallowing hard. "He killed her, not right away. He spent 2 years breaking her down piece by piece until there was nothing left but a ghost. Then one night he beat her so badly that she never woke up. He claimed she fell down the stairs. Everyone believed him because he was rich and respected, and she was just a woman who did not know her place." Emma felt tears spring to her eyes again, but these were for Grant's sister, for the pain she heard in his voice. "I am so sorry. I swore after Eliza died that if I ever saw another woman in that situation, I would not stand by and do nothing," Grant continued. "So when I heard Luther Blackthorne's housekeeper talking to the woman who runs the boarding house, saying that the new bride was scared and that Blackthorne was a cruel man who hurt his servants, I knew I had to act. I spent all night getting those papers made and working out what to say. I figured even if it only bought you a few days, it might give you time to figure out another option." Emma looked at this man who had upended his entire life for a stranger, who had risked Luther's wrath and possible legal consequences to give her a chance at freedom. "What happens now?" she asked quietly. "When Luther discovers the truth, he will come looking for both of us. He will not let this go." "No, he will not," Grant agreed. "Which is why I need to get you somewhere safe. I have been thinking on it. There is a town called Silver City in New Mexico, about 3 days' ride from here. It is big enough that you could disappear, find work maybe. I have some money saved up, not much but enough to get you started." Emma felt panic rising again. "You are just going to leave me in some strange town?" "I do not know anyone there. I have no skills, no way to support myself." "I will not just leave you," Grant said firmly. "I will make sure you are settled, help you find a safe place to stay and maybe some work. But Emma, I cannot just carry you off and keep you. That would make me no better than Luther Blackthorne, forcing you into a situation you do not want. What if, Emma said slowly, the idea forming as she spoke, what if we made the marriage real? Grant stared at her, his expression stunned. What? You said those papers were forgeries, but what if we actually got married? Not for real, I mean, not like a real marriage, but a partnership, an arrangement. It would protect me from Luther. He could not force me to marry him if I already had a husband. And I could work, help out on your ranch or whatever you need. I'm not afraid of hard work and I can learn. Emma, Grant said gently, you do not know me. You do not know anything about me except what happened today. You would be tying yourself to a stranger. I am already tied to a stranger, Emma pointed out. At least with you I would not be afraid. Grant, I saw your face today when you stood up to Luther. I heard the story about your sister. You are a good man. Maybe we do not love each other, maybe we never will, but I trust that you would not hurt me. That is more than I can say about anyone else in my life right now except my aunt, who is too far away to help me. Grant looked torn, and Emma pressed her advantage. Please. I know it is not what you planned. I know you are just trying to help and then move on with your life. But I am asking you to consider this. A marriage of convenience, a partnership. I need protection and you need someone to help with your home and work. We could help each other. A marriage in name only, Grant said slowly, working through the idea. Separate lives but bound by law for protection. Yes, Emma said, though something in her chest tightened at the thought of living her whole life without love or intimacy. But it was still better than Luther Blackthorne. Anything was better than that. Grant was quiet for a long time, his gaze distant as he thought. Finally, he looked at her, his gray-green eyes serious. If we do this, I need you to understand something. I would not force myself on you, ever. The marriage would be real in the eyes of the law, but what happens between us, that would be your choice. Always. And if you ever wanted to leave, if you found someone you truly cared for, I would not stand in your way. Emma felt something warm unfurl in her chest at his words. This man, this stranger, was offering her something no one else ever had: choice, agency, respect. And what about you? She asked. What if you fall in love with someone? A sad smile crossed Grant's face. I am not made for love, Emma. I learned that a long time ago. But I can offer you protection and partnership, and I give you my word that I would be a good husband in all the ways that matter, except maybe the romantic ones. It was not a fairy tale. It was not the kind of marriage Emma had dreamed of as a girl. But it was honest, and it was offered with kindness, and most importantly, it was her choice. She held out her hand to Grant. Then we have an agreement, a partnership. Grant took her hand, his grip warm and firm. A partnership, he echoed. But we need to make it legal before Luther figures out the truth. There is a small mission about half a day's ride from here. The priest there is a good man. He married my parents 30 years ago. If we can reach him by tomorrow, we can make this official. They rode through the afternoon and into the evening, stopping only to rest the horse and share what little food Grant had in his saddlebags. Emma found herself relaxing into the rhythm of the ride, her body adjusting to the movement of the horse and the solid presence of Grant behind her. He did not speak much, but when he did, his words were thoughtful and kind. He pointed out landmarks, told her stories about the country they were passing through, asked her about her life in St. Louis. As darkness fell, they made camp in a small clearing sheltered by rock formations. Grant built a fire with quick efficiency and then excused himself to check the surrounding area, giving Emma privacy to see to her personal needs. When he returned, he had a pair of rabbits that he had snared, which he skinned and cooked over the fire. Emma watched his hands work, fascinated by the competence and care he brought to even these simple tasks. Where did you learn all this? she asked as he handed her a portion of the meat on a flat stone that served as a plate. Growing up, Grant said simply. My father was a rancher, and he believed in teaching his children to take care of themselves. Eliza was just as capable as me and my brothers. She could rope and ride and shoot as well as any of us. His expression darkened. Not that it saved her in the end. Emma reached out and touched his hand briefly. I am sorry you lost her, but I am grateful that her memory led you to help me. They ate in comfortable silence, and then Grant spread out his bedroll and a blanket near the fire. You take the bedroll, he said. I will sleep closer to the fire. We could share, Emma said, then felt her face heat. I mean, so you do not have to sleep on the ground, just to sleep. I trust you. Grant looked surprised, then touched. All right, he said quietly, if you are sure. They lay down side by side, maintaining a careful distance between their bodies. Emma could hear Grant's breathing, feel the warmth that radiated from him. She had shared a bed with her sisters growing up, but this was different, more intimate somehow, even though they were not touching. Above them, the stars spread across the sky in a brilliant display that took Emma's breath away. She had never seen so many stars. In St. Louis, the city lights dimmed them. Here, they blazed with an intensity that made her feel small and insignificant, but also part of something vast and beautiful. Grant, she said softly into the darkness. Yes, thank you, for everything. I know this is not what you wanted, but I am grateful. She heard him shift, turning toward her, though she could not make out his expression in the darkness. Maybe it is not what I planned, he said slowly, but I do not regret it. You are brave, Emma Turner, braver than you know. Emma fell asleep with those words warming her heart, feeling safer than she had in months. They reached the mission the next day just after noon. It was a small adobe structure with a cross on the roof, surrounded by a garden that somehow flourished in this harsh landscape. The priest, Father Miguel, was an elderly man with gentle eyes who greeted Grant like an old friend. When Grant explained the situation, leaving out the details of Luther and the forgery but making it clear that Emma needed the protection of a legal marriage, the priest studied them both for a long moment. This is what you both want, he asked in accented English. You understand that marriage is a sacred bond, not to be entered into lightly. We understand, Father, Grant said. And we both choose this freely. Father Miguel looked at Emma. Child, is this your wish? Emma met the priest's kind gaze and thought about the choice she was making. It was happening so fast, with so little time to think. But when she tried to imagine any other path forward, all she saw was Luther's cold eyes and cruel smile. At least with Grant, she had a chance at something better. Yes, Father, this is my wish. The ceremony was simple, conducted in the small chapel with only Father Miguel's housekeeper as a witness. Emma wore the dusty traveling suit she had been married in the day before, but this time, when she spoke her vows, her voice was steady. Grant's hand was warm around hers, his eyes serious as he promised to honor and protect her. When Father Miguel pronounced them married and Grant leaned down to press a chaste kiss to her cheek, Emma felt tears sting her eyes. They were not tears of despair this time, but something more complicated. Relief, certainly, but also a strange sort of hope. Father Miguel gave them a marriage certificate, the ink still wet, and blessed them both. May you find happiness together, he said, and may you always treat each other with kindness and respect. They rode away from the mission as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. Emma was now Emma Quincy, bound by law and God to a man she barely knew. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt a sense of calm settle over her. She had made a choice. It might not have been the choice she would have made in other circumstances, but it was hers, and that mattered. Where do we go now? She asked Grant as they rode north. Home, Grant said. I work for a man named Thomas Quinn who runs a cattle operation about 20 miles north of Clifton. I have a small house on the property, nothing fancy, but it is solid and weatherproof. That is where we will live. What will you tell Mr. Quinn? He will be surprised to find you suddenly married." Grant chuckled, and the sound made something flutter in Emma's stomach. Thomas is a good man. He will not ask too many questions as long as the work gets done. And I figure we will tell him a version of the truth. That we met, decided to marry quickly, and here we are. People do that sometimes in this country. Life is uncertain enough that folks do not always wait around for long courtships. They did not reach the ranch that night, making camp instead under a vast sky that blazed with stars. This time, when they lay down together, Emma found herself acutely aware of Grant's presence beside her. She studied his profile in the firelight, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at his collar. He was handsome, she realized, in a rough, weathered way that suited this harsh landscape. More than that, he was kind. He had shown her more consideration and respect in 2 days than her father had in her entire life. "Can I ask you something?" Emma said into the quiet. "Of course." "Why did you say you are not made for love? Earlier, when we were talking about the marriage, you said that." Grant was silent for so long that Emma thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with old wounds. "I was engaged once, about 5 years ago. Her name was Catherine. She was the daughter of a rancher over in New Mexico. We courted for nearly a year, and I thought we had something real. But a month before the wedding, she broke it off, said she had met someone else, someone with better prospects. A banker from back east who could give her a fine house and a comfortable life, not a ranch hand who smelled like cattle and lived in a tiny house." "I am sorry," Emma said softly. "That must have hurt terribly." "It did," Grant admitted. "But more than that, it taught me something. Love is not enough, not in this world. People need practical things, security and comfort and status. Romance is for stories and songs, not real life. So I learned to focus on what I could control, my work, my word, being a good man. That is enough for me." Emma wanted to argue with him, to tell him that he was wrong, that love was real and possible. But what did she know about it? She had never been in love. She had never even been courted properly, just paraded in front of potential suitors like a prize mare. Maybe Grant was right. Maybe practical partnerships were better than chasing romantic ideals that never materialized. But as she drifted off to sleep, pressed close to Grant's warmth in the cool desert night, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered that maybe, just maybe, there could be more to this arrangement than either of them expected. They reached the Quinn Ranch the following afternoon. It was a sprawling operation with a main house, several barns, and a scattering of smaller buildings that housed the ranch hands. The land stretched out in all directions, dotted with cattle and bordered by distant mountains that turned purple in the afternoon light. It was harsh and beautiful in equal measure, so different from the green hills of Missouri that Emma felt like she had traveled to another world entirely. Grant's house was exactly as he had described it. Small but solid, a simple wooden structure with 2 rooms and a covered porch. It was sparsely furnished with handmade furniture that showed signs of careful use. There was a main room with a table, 2 chairs, and a wood stove, and a smaller bedroom with a narrow bed and a trunk for storage. It was clean and orderly in a way that spoke of a man who lived alone and took care of his space. "It is not much," Grant said, setting Emma's trunk down and looking around the space as if seeing it through her eyes. "I know it is not what you are used to." "It is perfect," Emma said honestly. "It is mine. Ours," she corrected quickly. "That is more than I have had in a very long time." Grant showed her around, pointing out where things were kept and how the stove worked. "I will need to add on another room," he said thoughtfully, "and get a proper bed. That one is barely big enough for me, let alone both of us. For now, I will sleep out here in the main room. You take the bedroom. Grant, I cannot take your bed. This is your home." "It is our home now," Grant said firmly, "and you are my wife. I will not have you sleeping on the floor or on that old bench. We will make do until I can build something better." Over the next few days, Emma began to settle into her new life. Grant introduced her to Thomas Quinn, who ran the ranch with his wife Sarah. Thomas was a gruff man in his 50s with a weather-beaten face and shrewd eyes, but he greeted Emma warmly and did not ask uncomfortable questions about the speed of their courtship. Sarah was more open in her curiosity, but also kind, immediately taking Emma under her wing and offering to help her adjust to ranch life. "It is hard out here for women," Sarah said frankly as she showed Emma around the main house. "We work just as hard as the men, just at different things. But we take care of our own. If you need anything at all, you come to me." "Understood," Emma nodded, grateful for the older woman's straightforward kindness. Sarah taught her how to manage the wood stove, how to make bread that could withstand the dry climate, how to preserve food and stretch supplies. Emma threw herself into learning, desperate to prove that she could be useful, that she was not just a burden Grant had taken on out of misplaced chivalry. Grant, for his part, continued to treat her with unfailing courtesy and respect. He worked long hours with the cattle, often leaving before dawn and not returning until after sunset. But he always made sure Emma had everything she needed before he left, and he brought her small gifts. Wildflowers he had found on the range, a piece of pretty quartz he had picked up, fresh meat from a deer he had shot. They were simple things, but they touched Emma deeply because they showed that he was thinking of her even when they were apart. In the evenings, they would sit together on the porch and talk. Grant told her about the ranch, about the country and the challenges of raising cattle in this unforgiving landscape. Emma told him about her life in St. Louis, about her sisters and her aunt, about the books she had loved and the dreams she had harbored before her father had arranged her marriage to Luther. Slowly, carefully, they were building something between them. Not romance, Emma told herself. Just friendship and partnership, exactly as they had agreed. But sometimes, in the quiet moments, Emma would catch herself watching Grant as he worked, admiring the way his body moved with unconscious grace, the play of muscles under his worn shirt. Sometimes she would wake in the night and hear him moving in the other room, and she would wonder what it would be like to have him sleeping beside her, to feel his arms around her for reasons other than necessity during a cold night. These thoughts confused and frightened her. She had agreed to a practical arrangement, and it was unfair to want more when Grant had been so clear about his feelings. 3 weeks after their arrival at the ranch, their fragile peace was shattered. Emma was in the garden behind the house, pulling weeds and trying to coax some vegetables to grow in the stubborn soil, when she heard the sound of horses approaching. She straightened up, shading her eyes against the sun, and felt her blood turn to ice. Luther Blackthorne sat astride a fine black horse, flanked by 2 rough-looking men who had the appearance of hired guns. His face was hard with rage, but his voice when he spoke was coldly controlled. "Mrs. Quincy, or should I say Miss Turner, since that is still your legal name?" Emma took a step backward, her heart pounding. "I am married to Grant Quincy. We were wed by a priest, and it is all legal and proper." "After you were supposed to marry me," Luther said, dismounting with smooth grace. "After I paid good money for you and made arrangements. Do you have any idea what your little stunt cost me? Not just money, though that is considerable, but reputation. People are laughing at me, saying I could not even hold onto a bride. I do not take kindly to being made a fool of, Emma." "I did not mean to hurt you," Emma said, though the words tasted like lies. She had not thought about Luther's feelings at all when she ran. She had only thought about escaping. "I just could not marry you. I did not love you, and I did not think we would make each other happy." Luther's smile was chilling. "Love, happiness, such foolish concerns. Marriage is a business arrangement, nothing more, and you broke our contract. Your father took my money under false pretenses. I want compensation for what I am owed." "I do not have any money," Emma said, taking another step back. She was acutely aware that she was alone here, that Grant was out on the range and would not be back for hours. "I can try to pay you back, but it will take time." "Oh, I do not want money from you," Luther said softly, advancing on her. "I want what I bought and paid for. You are coming back to Clifton with me, Emma. Whether you do so willingly or not is up to you." One of the hired guns moved to circle around behind Emma, cutting off her escape route. Panic flooded through her, sharp and overwhelming. She opened her mouth to scream, but Luther was faster. He lunged forward and clamped his hand over her mouth, his other arm wrapping around her waist like a vice. "Bring the rope," Luther said to his men. "We will tie her and take her back. And if anyone asks, we will say she came willingly, that she regretted her hasty marriage and wanted to return to her proper betrothed." Emma fought with everything she had, kicking and scratching and trying to bite the hand that covered her mouth. But Luther was strong, and he had help. The hired guns grabbed her arms, and she felt rough rope biting into her wrists. This could not be happening. She had escaped. She was free. She was married to Grant. The sound of a gunshot split the air, and everyone froze. Grant stood at the corner of the house, his revolver in his hand and his face set in lines of cold fury. "Let her go," he said, his voice deadly calm. "Right now." Luther's grip on Emma tightened. "This does not concern you, Quincy. This is between me and the woman who broke her promise to me. Her father accepted my money, and I have every right to claim what is mine." "She is not yours," Grant said, taking a step closer. "She is my wife. I have the papers to prove it, signed by a priest and filed with the territorial government. You have no claim on her." "Your marriage is invalid," Luther spat. "She was already promised to me. I could have it annulled." "Try it," Grant said. "But in the meantime, you are on Quinn land, threatening my wife. That gives me the right to defend her by any means necessary. And I am a very good shot, Blackthorne. I could put a bullet through your head before you could blink." The two hired guns shifted nervously, their hands moving toward their own weapons. But Grant's gun never wavered, and there was something in his eyes that made even these hardened men hesitate. Emma could feel the tension coiling tighter and tighter, about to snap. Someone was going to die here, and she could not bear the thought that it might be Grant, that he might be killed trying to protect her. "Luther, please," she said, her voice shaking. "Just go. I will find a way to pay back what my father owes you. But please, just leave. No one needs to die today." Luther's grip loosened slightly, and Emma seized the moment. She twisted hard, breaking free of his hold, and ran toward Grant. He caught her with one arm, pulling her behind him, his gun still trained on Luther. "You heard her," Grant said. "Leave, and do not come back. If I see you on this property again, I will not bother with warnings." Luther's face was mottled with rage, but he was not stupid. 3-against-1 odds would normally be in his favor, but Grant had the drop on them and the cold determination of a man who had nothing left to lose. Luther jerked his head at his men, and they mounted up. But before he rode away, Luther looked at Emma with eyes full of promise and threat. "This is not over," he said. "You will pay for this humiliation, both of you. I swear it." They galloped away, leaving Emma and Grant standing in the yard, both of them shaking with reaction. Grant lowered his gun slowly and turned to Emma, his hands moving over her shoulders and arms, checking for injuries. "Are you hurt?" Did he hurt you?" "No, I am all right," Emma managed, though her wrists were raw from the rope and her body ached from Luther's rough handling. "You came just in time." "How did you know?" "I saw them riding this way from the north pasture," Grant said, his voice tight with anger. "I rode back as fast as I could. Emma, I am so sorry. I should have known he would not give up that easily. I should have been here." "You could not have known," Emma said. "Grant, you saved me. Again. If you had not come when you did." She could not finish the sentence. Grant pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly against his chest. Emma could feel his heart pounding as hard as her own, could feel the tremor in his hands as he stroked her hair. "I will not let him take you," Grant said fiercely. "I swear to you, Emma. As long as I draw breath, he will not touch you again." Emma clung to him, breathing in the scent of horse and leather and sage that she had come to associate with safety. In his arms, the terror began to recede, replaced by something warmer and more complicated. She realized that she did not want him to let her go. She wanted to stay right here, pressed against his chest, feeling his heart beat beneath her cheek. That night, neither of them could sleep. Grant paced the main room like a caged animal while Emma sat at the table, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders despite the warm night. Finally, Grant stopped pacing and sat down across from her. "We need to talk about what happens next," he said. "Luther meant what he said. This is not over. He is going to come back, and next time he might bring more men. I can protect you here, but I cannot be with you every moment, and I will not lock you up like a prisoner in your own home." "What are our options?" Emma asked. "We could leave," Grant said slowly. "Pack up and head farther north, maybe up to Montana or Wyoming. Start fresh where Luther could not easily find us. You would give up your job here, your home, because of me?" "In a heartbeat," Grant said simply, and the certainty in his voice made Emma's breath catch. "Emma, when I married you, I meant those vows. To protect you, to honor you. That is not just words. If leaving is what keeps you safe, then that is what we will do." Emma thought about it, about running again, about starting over in yet another strange place. But something in her rebelled at the idea. She was tired of running, tired of letting men like her father and Luther Blackthorne dictate her life. "No," she said firmly. "I do not want to run. This is our home. We should not have to give it up because Luther is a vindictive man who cannot accept that he does not own me." "Then we stay and fight," Grant said. "But Emma, you need to understand what that means. Luther is a powerful man with a lot of money. He can make life very difficult for us. And if he decides to get violent, people could get hurt." "I know," Emma said, "but I am tired of being afraid. I am tired of living my life based on what men want from me. I chose you, Grant. I chose this life, and I am not going to let Luther Blackthorne take that away." Grant reached across the table and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle as they intertwined with hers. "Then we face this together," he said. "As partners." "As partners," Emma echoed, and she felt something shift inside her, something warm and solid taking root. Over the next weeks, they prepared for Luther's return. Grant taught Emma to shoot, spending long hours with her behind the house as she learned to handle a rifle. She was not a natural shot, but she was determined, and gradually her aim improved. Thomas Quinn, learning of the situation, offered his support. He stationed some of his men near Grant's house, making it clear that anyone who threatened one of his workers would have to deal with the whole ranch. But as the days passed and Luther did not return, Emma found herself relaxing slightly. Life fell into a rhythm. She tended the garden, kept the house, learned to cook the simple, hearty meals that sustained ranch life. Grant continued to work the cattle, but he made sure to come home earlier in the evenings, unwilling to leave Emma alone for too long. Their relationship deepened in ways that surprised Emma. The careful distance they had maintained at first began to erode. They talked more freely, laughed together, worked side by side on projects around the house. Grant proved to be patient and kind, with a dry sense of humor that caught Emma off guard and made her laugh. She learned that he loved reading, something she never would have guessed about a cowboy. He had a small collection of books, including poetry, that he kept carefully wrapped in oilcloth to protect from dust and damp. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold, Emma found herself studying Grant's profile. He had removed his hat, and the evening light caught in his dark hair, turning it bronze. His face, usually so guarded, was relaxed and peaceful. Emma felt something flutter in her chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the temperature. "Grant," she said softly, "can I ask you something personal?" He turned to look at her, his gray-green eyes curious. "Of course. Do you ever regret it? Marrying me, I mean. Your life was simpler before. Now you have Luther Blackthorne as an enemy, and you are stuck with a wife you never planned on having." Grant was quiet for a moment, and Emma's heart sank. But then he reached over and took her hand, his thumb rubbing gentle circles on her palm. "I do not regret it," he said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Emma, these past weeks with you have been good, better than I expected. You are smart and funny and brave as hell. I like having you in my life. I like coming home to you. That is not something I ever thought I would feel again after Catherine." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. "I like it too," she admitted. "I like this life we are building. I like you, Grant, more than I thought I would when we first made this arrangement." Something shifted in Grant's expression, his eyes darkening with an emotion Emma could not quite name. He leaned closer, and for a moment Emma thought he might kiss her. Her heart raced, and she realized with startling clarity that she wanted him to. But instead, Grant pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead and then pulled back. "I am glad," he said softly, "because I like you too, Emma, quite a lot." It was not a declaration of love, but it was something. It was honest and real, and it made Emma's heart sing. The next day, Sarah Quinn invited Emma to the main house for tea. The two women sat in Sarah's comfortable parlor, and the older woman studied Emma with shrewd eyes. "You are looking happier," she observed. "Ranch life must be agreeing with you." "It is," Emma said honestly. "I never expected to like it so much, but I do. I like the work and the challenge of it. I like feeling useful." "And Grant?" Sarah asked with a knowing smile. "How are things with your husband?" Emma felt her cheeks heat. "He is very kind to me, patient and respectful." "That is good," Sarah said, "but Emma, marriage is about more than kindness and respect. Those are important, but there should be warmth too, affection, even love if you are lucky." "We married very quickly," Emma said carefully. "It was practical, not romantic. I do not think Grant sees me that way." Sarah laughed, a warm, rich sound. "Oh, my dear girl, I have seen the way that man looks at you when he thinks no one is watching. He is halfway in love with you already, whether he knows it or not. The question is, how do you feel about him?" Emma opened her mouth to give a careful, measured response, but what came out was the truth. "I think I am falling in love with him," she whispered. "I did not mean to. It was not part of our agreement, but I cannot help it. He is everything I never knew I wanted, and it terrifies me because what if he does not feel the same way? What if I ruin this good thing we have by wanting more?" Sarah reached over and squeezed Emma's hand. "Love is always a risk, sweet girl. But from what I have seen, Grant Quincy is a man worth taking that risk for. And I suspect if you opened yourself up to him, really let him see how you feel, you might be surprised by what you find." Emma thought about Sarah's words all the way back to her own house. She was still thinking about them that evening as she prepared dinner, as Grant came home dusty and tired from a long day. She watched him wash up at the basin, saw the way his shirt clung to his broad shoulders, and felt that flutter in her chest again. This was not just attraction, though there was certainly that. This was something deeper, something that had been growing steadily since the day he had walked into Luther's parlor and turned her world upside down. That night after dinner, Grant announced that he had finally finished building the addition to the house. "It is not fancy," he said, leading Emma into the new room, "but it is big enough for a proper bed and some privacy for both of us." The new room was lovely, with windows that looked out over the eastern hills and enough space for a real bed that Grant had built with his own hands. There was even a small wardrobe for Emma's clothes. "Grant, it is wonderful," Emma said, running her hand over the smooth wood of the bed frame. "You did all this for me, for us," Grant corrected. "You cannot keep sleeping in that narrow bed, and I cannot keep pretending the floor is comfortable. This way we both have proper space." "But we could share," Emma said, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I mean, if you wanted to. We are married, after all. It would not be improper." Grant went very still, his eyes searching her face. "Emma, I do not want you to feel pressured into anything. I know our arrangement was not supposed to include that kind of intimacy. What if I wanted to?" Emma asked, her heart pounding so hard she was sure he must be able to hear it. "What if I want more than just a practical partnership?" Grant crossed the room in 2 long strides, his hands coming up to cup her face. "Emma, are you sure? Because if we cross this line, I do not think I could go back. I do not think I could go back to keeping my distance and pretending you are just a friend I happen to be married to." "I do not want you to keep your distance," Emma whispered. "I want you, Grant. I want this to be a real marriage in every way. I want us to have a real life together." The kiss, when it finally came, was everything Emma had imagined and more. Grant's lips were gentle at first, careful and questioning, but when Emma responded, wrapping her arms around his neck and pressing closer, the kiss deepened. It was not the fumbling, awkward thing Emma had feared. It was perfect, a communication without words that said everything they had both been too afraid to say out loud. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, Grant rested his forehead against Emma's. "I have wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted, "but I was afraid. I did not want to push you into something you were not ready for." "I am ready," Emma said firmly. "I have been ready. I just did not know if you felt the same way." "Emma," Grant said, his voice rough with emotion, "I have been falling for you since the day you stood up in Luther's parlor and chose to trust me. Every day since then, you have impressed me and surprised me and made me feel things I thought I would never feel again. I love you. I did not plan to, I did not even want to, but I do. I love you." Emma felt tears streaming down her face, but they were happy tears. "I love you too," she said. "I love you so much it scares me." They stood there in the new room, holding each other as the last light faded from the sky outside. And then, Grant swept Emma into his arms and carried her to the bed he had built with his own hands, and they made their marriage real in every sense of the word. The next weeks were a revelation. Emma had not known that marriage could be like this, that physical intimacy could be tender and passionate and fun all at once. Grant was a generous and attentive lover, always making sure Emma's needs were met before his own. They learned each other's bodies, with the same careful attention they had brought to learning each other's minds and hearts. Emma discovered that she loved the feel of Grant's work-roughened hands on her skin, loved the way he whispered her name in the darkness, loved waking up wrapped in his arms with the dawn light streaming through the windows. Life on the ranch continued, but everything felt different now, brighter somehow. Emma threw herself into her work with renewed energy, taking pride in the garden that was finally starting to flourish under her care, in the meals she prepared, in the home she and Grant were building together. She made friends with the other ranch wives, women who taught her the skills she needed to thrive in this harsh landscape. She learned to preserve food for the winter, to mend clothes and make soap and treat minor injuries. She proved herself capable and resilient, earning the respect of the entire ranch community. Grant flourished too, his natural reserve softening as love and happiness eased the old wounds he carried. He smiled more, laughed more, and seemed younger somehow. Thomas Quinn commented on it more than once, clapping Grant on the shoulder and saying that marriage clearly agreed with him. But their happiness was not to last unchallenged. 2 months after Emma and Grant had finally admitted their love for each other, Luther Blackthorne returned. This time, he did not come in person. Instead, a telegram arrived for Thomas Quinn, announcing that Luther was bringing suit against Grant for fraud and against Emma for breach of contract. He claimed that the forged marriage certificate Grant had presented in Clifton was proof of criminal intent, and he demanded that Emma be returned to him to fulfill her original marriage contract, or that he be compensated for his losses to the tune of $5,000. $5,000 was a fortune, more money than Grant could earn in 10 years of ranch work. If Luther won his suit, it would ruin them. They would lose everything. Thomas Quinn gathered Grant and Emma in his study to discuss the situation. "This is serious," he said bluntly. "Luther has hired a lawyer from back east, someone with connections to the territorial government. He is going to argue that your marriage is invalid because it was based on fraud, and that Emma's father's contract with him takes precedence." "But we were legally married by Father Miguel," Emma protested. "After the incident in Clifton, that marriage is real and binding." "The problem is the timing," Thomas said. "Luther is arguing that because you were under contract to marry him when you wed Grant, your second marriage is invalid. It is a legal gray area, and with the right judge, Luther might actually win." Emma felt sick. She looked at Grant, who had gone pale beneath his tan. "What do we do?" she asked. "We fight," Grant said firmly. "We get our own lawyer and we fight this." "I will not let Luther take you away from me, Emma. I will not." "And where are you going to get the money for a lawyer?" Thomas asked gently. "Grant, I will help however I can, but I am a rancher, not a rich man. I do not have the resources to go up against someone like Luther Blackthorne in a protracted legal battle." The room fell silent as the weight of their situation sank in. Emma felt despair clawing at her chest. They had finally found happiness, finally built something real and good, and now Luther was going to destroy it all out of pure vindictiveness. "There might be another way," Sarah Quinn said from the doorway. They all turned to look at her. She had been listening, and her face was set with determination. "Emma, you said your father accepted money from Luther for your marriage contract, correct?" "Yes," Emma said. "Luther paid him and my father agreed to the arrangement." "But did you agree to it?" Sarah asked pointedly. "Did you sign anything? Were you a party to the contract?" Emma thought back, her mind racing. "No," she said slowly. "I never signed anything. My father made the arrangement without consulting me. I only learned about it when the telegram came telling me to travel to Arizona." Sarah looked at Thomas. "Then how can there be a valid contract?" Emma was of legal age. Her father could not sell her into marriage without her consent. A contract requires the agreement of all parties involved. Thomas sat up straighter, his eyes lighting with understanding. "Sarah, you are brilliant. That is exactly right. If Emma never consented to the arrangement, then there was no valid contract for her to breach. Luther's entire case falls apart." Hope flared in Emma's chest. "Is that really true? Could we actually win this?" "We would still need a lawyer to argue it properly," Thomas said. but it is a strong argument, much stronger than trying to defend the forged documents or argue about the timing of the marriages. If we can prove that Emma never consented to marry Luther, then he has no claim on her at all. They found a lawyer in Silver City, a sharp-minded woman named Abigail Morris who had made a name for herself handling property disputes and contract law. When Emma and Grant met with her and explained the situation, Abigail's eyes gleamed with interest. "This is good," she said, making notes on a pad of paper. "This is very good. The law is clear on this point. A woman of legal age cannot be forced into a marriage contract without her explicit consent. Your father's agreement with Mr. Blackthorne is meaningless without your signature or your verbal consent witnessed by a third party. Luther will argue that I consented by traveling to Arizona to meet him," Emma said. "That my actions implied agreement." "Let him try," Abigail said with a fierce smile. "I will tear that argument apart. You traveled under duress with no real alternative. That is not consent, that is coercion. We can also bring up the fact that you attempted to refuse and that your refusal was ignored." "Do you have any witnesses to your objections?" "My aunt," Emma said. "Margaret Turner in St. Louis. She knew I did not want to marry Luther. She was there when the telegram came." "Perfect," Abigail said. "I will subpoena her testimony. We are going to win this, Mrs. Quincy, I promise you that." The case went to trial in late October in the territorial court in Silver City. Luther Blackthorne arrived with his expensive lawyer and an air of absolute confidence. He clearly expected to win, to have Emma handed back to him like a piece of lost property. Emma sat between Grant and Abigail Morris at the defendant's table, her hands clenched so tightly in her lap that her knuckles were white. The trial lasted 3 days. Luther's lawyer presented his case first, painting a picture of a naive young woman led astray by a conniving cowboy who had forged documents and stolen another man's bride. He waived the fake marriage certificate that Grant had used in Clifton, presented receipts showing the money Luther had paid to Emma's father, and called witnesses who testified to Luther's good character and standing in the community. Grant sat through it all with his jaw clenched, his hand finding Emma's under the table and holding tight. Emma could feel the tension radiating from him, knew he was reliving the fear and uncertainty of those early days. But she also felt his love and his determination to protect her, and it gave her strength. When it was Abigail Morris's turn to present their defense, she was devastating. She called Emma to the stand first, and Emma told her story in a clear, steady voice. She described receiving the telegram, her fear and distress, her father's refusal to listen to her objections. She told the court about meeting Luther and the terror she had felt in his presence, the way he had looked at her like she was property to be owned. She described Grant's intervention and their subsequent legal marriage by Father Miguel. "Mrs. Quincy," Abigail asked, "at any point before you left St. Louis, did you agree to marry Luther Blackthorne?" "No," Emma said firmly. "I never agreed. I begged my father not to force me into it, but he would not listen." "Did you sign any documents agreeing to the marriage?" "No." "Did Mr. Blackthorne or your father ever ask for your consent?" "No. They treated it as a done deal, something that had been decided without any need for my input." Abigail turned to the judge. "Your Honor, the law is clear. A contract requires the free consent of all parties involved. Miss Turner, as she was then, never consented to marry Mr. Blackthorne. Without her consent, there was no valid contract and therefore no breach of contract. Mr. Blackthorne's suit has no legal merit." Luther's lawyer objected strenuously, but Abigail was prepared. She presented testimony from Emma's Aunt Margaret, who had made the journey from St. Louis specifically to testify. Margaret told the court about Emma's distress, about the $50 she had given her niece to help her escape if needed, about a young woman who had been crying out for help, but had been ignored by everyone who should have protected her. The judge, a stern man with iron gray hair, listened to everything with careful attention. When both sides had finished presenting their cases, he took less than an hour to reach his verdict. "I find that no valid marriage contract existed between Miss Emma Turner and Mr. Luther Blackthorne," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. Miss Turner, being of legal age, could not be bound by an agreement to which she did not consent. The marriage between Mrs. Emma Quincy and Mr. Grant Quincy, performed by Father Miguel and properly registered with the territorial government, is valid and binding. Mr. Blackthorne's suit is dismissed, and he is ordered to pay court costs. Emma felt her knees go weak with relief. Grant's arm came around her waist, holding her steady as the courtroom erupted in conversation. They had won. It was over. Luther could not touch them now. Luther Blackthorne stood frozen at his table, his face purple with rage. For a moment, Emma thought he might try something violent right there in the courtroom. But his lawyer put a hand on his arm and whispered something urgent, and Luther finally turned and stalked out of the room without another word. Outside the courthouse, Grant swept Emma into his arms and kissed her soundly, not caring who was watching. "It is over," he said against her hair. "Really over. You are safe now, Emma, we both are." Emma clung to him, tears of relief streaming down her face. "I cannot believe it. I cannot believe we actually won." "You won," Abigail Morris said, coming up beside them with a satisfied smile. "You stood up for yourself and told your truth. That took courage, Mrs. Quincy. I am proud to have represented you." They celebrated that night at the Silver City Hotel, with Thomas and Sarah Quinn joining them for dinner. It was a joyous occasion, full of laughter and relief and plans for the future. Emma felt lighter than she had in months, as if a crushing weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She was free, truly free in a way she had never been before. Free to love Grant, free to build the life they wanted together, free from fear. They returned to the ranch the next day and threw themselves back into their life with renewed vigor. The autumn work was in full swing, and Grant was busy helping to move cattle to lower pastures before winter set in. Emma worked alongside Sarah and the other ranch women to preserve the harvest, putting up jars of vegetables and fruits, smoking meat, preparing for the long, cold months ahead. But even as they worked, Emma and Grant stole moments together, their love for each other evident in every look and touch. They had fought for their happiness and won, and it made what they had together all the more precious. Winter in Arizona was milder than Emma had expected, though there were still cold nights when she and Grant would huddle together under piles of blankets, talking and laughing and making love in the warmth of their bed. Emma discovered that she loved the rhythm of ranch life, the way the seasons dictated the work, the sense of community and shared purpose. This was home in a way that St. Louis had never been. This was where she belonged. In February, Emma realized that she had missed her monthly courses twice in a row. At first, she thought it was just the stress of everything that had happened, the trial and the upheaval. But when Sarah took one look at her face and asked if she was with child, Emma realized it was true. She was pregnant. She and Grant were going to have a baby. She told Grant that evening, barely able to contain her excitement and nervousness. He stared at her for a long moment, his face unreadable, and Emma felt a flutter of fear. What if he was not happy about this? What if it was too soon? But then Grant's face broke into the widest smile Emma had ever seen, and he picked her up and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are going to have a baby," he said, wonder in his voice. "Emma, we are going to be parents. "Are you happy?" Emma asked, needing to hear him say it. "Happy." Grant set her down gently and cupped her face in his hands. "Emma, I am more than happy. I am overjoyed, terrified but overjoyed. We are going to have a family together. A real family. I never thought I would have that." Emma threw her arms around his neck and held on tight. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Grant said, "more than I ever thought possible." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, though Emma dealt with bouts of sickness in the early months that left her exhausted. Grant was attentive and worried, hovering over her until Emma finally had to tell him that she was pregnant, not dying, and he needed to let her breathe. But his concern came from love, and Emma found it more endearing than annoying. Sarah Quinn took Emma under her wing, teaching her what to expect and how to prepare for the baby's arrival. The other ranch women were equally generous, sharing advice and hand-me-down baby clothes. Emma felt surrounded by support and love in a way she had never experienced growing up. This was what family was supposed to be, she realized. Not people bound by blood and obligation, but people who chose to care for each other. As Emma's belly grew, Grant worked on expanding their house again, adding a small nursery off the main bedroom. He built a cradle with his own hands, sanding the wood until it was smooth as silk so that no splinters could harm their baby. Emma made blankets and tiny clothes, her heart full of anticipation and love for the child she had not yet met. In late September, as the leaves on the cottonwoods along the river began to turn gold, Emma went into labor. It was long and difficult, lasting nearly 20 hours. Sarah Quinn was there, along with the midwife from town, both women guiding Emma through the pain and fear. Grant paced outside, refusing to go far, his worry palpable to everyone. When the baby finally came, it was a boy with a healthy set of lungs and a shock of dark hair. Emma held her son for the first time and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. This tiny person, this perfect little human, was hers and Grant's. They had made him together out of love and hope. Grant came in to meet his son, his eyes red-rimmed and his hands shaking. He looked at the baby with an expression of pure awe, then at Emma with so much love it took her breath away. "He is perfect," Grant said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are perfect. Emma, thank you. Thank you for this, for him, for everything." They named their son William Thomas Quincy after Grant's father and the man who had given Grant a home and a job when he needed it most. Little Will, as they called him, was a good baby, healthy and alert. Emma threw herself into motherhood with the same determination she brought to everything else, learning as she went and asking for help when she needed it. Life settled into a new rhythm, one that included feedings and diaper changes and sleepless nights. But Emma had never been happier. She would lie awake at night sometimes, nursing Will while Grant slept beside them, and marvel at how much her life had changed. A year ago, she had been a terrified girl traveling toward a nightmare. Now she was a woman with a husband she loved, a son she adored, and a home that was truly hers. The years passed with the sweet, steady rhythm of a good life. Emma and Grant's family grew. A daughter came 2 years after Will, a beautiful girl with her mother's dark eyes and her father's smile. They named her Eliza, after Grant's sister, and Grant cried when he held his daughter for the first time. Another son followed 3 years later, and then another daughter. Their house expanded to accommodate the growing family, and their days were filled with the beautiful chaos of children and ranch life. Grant proved to be a wonderful father, patient and loving with his children in ways that his own father had never been with him. He taught Will to ride and rope, but he also taught Eliza the same skills, refusing to limit his daughters because of their gender. Emma watched her husband with their children and fell more in love with him with each passing day. The ranch prospered under Thomas Quinn's management, and Grant's hard work was rewarded with a promotion to foreman. It meant more responsibility and better pay, and it allowed Emma and Grant to start putting money away for their children's futures. They never became rich, but they had enough. More than enough. They had each other, their children, their home, and their community. Emma stayed in touch with her Aunt Margaret, who came to visit several times over the years, and marveled at the life Emma had built. Margaret brought news from St. Louis, including word that Emma's father had died and left his estate to Emma's younger sisters. Emma felt nothing at the news of her father's death, except perhaps a distant sadness for what might have been if he had been a different kind of man. Luther Blackthorne, they heard through various sources, had eventually married a much younger woman from back east who had given him 2 children before running off with a traveling salesman, taking a substantial portion of Luther's money with her. Emma felt no satisfaction in Luther's misfortunes, only relief that he was preoccupied with his own problems and had left them alone. They never saw him again, and his name gradually stopped being mentioned in the region. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Grant surprised Emma with a trip to Santa Fe, just the 2 of them, with Sarah and Thomas watching the children. It was the first time they had been alone together in years, and Emma felt like a young bride again as they explored the city and stayed in a real hotel with a soft bed and room service. "You ever regret it?" Grant asked one evening as they sat on the hotel balcony, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of rose and gold. "Marrying me, I mean. You gave up the life you might have had back east, all the comforts and opportunities." Emma looked at her husband, at the silver that was starting to appear in his dark hair, at the lines that years of sun and hard work had etched into his face. She thought about everything they had built together, the family they had created, the love that had grown between them until it was as much a part of her as breathing. "Not for a single second," she said firmly, taking his hand. "Grant, you gave me everything I never knew I wanted. You gave me freedom and respect and love. You gave me a home and a family and a life that is mine, truly mine. How could I ever regret that?" Grant brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "I am the lucky one," he said. "You took a chance on a broken-down cowboy with more scars than sense, and you gave me a reason to hope again. You gave me love when I thought I would never feel it. Emma, you are the best thing that ever happened to me." They sat together as darkness fell, holding hands and watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast New Mexico sky. Emma thought about the girl she had been, frightened and desperate, stepping off that stagecoach in Clifton. She thought about the cowboy who had stood up in a parlor full of people and offered her a different kind of marriage, a marriage based on respect and choice and partnership. Neither of them had known where that moment would lead, but they had trusted each other enough to find out. And what they had found was love. Real, deep, lasting love that had carried them through challenges and celebrated joys and built something beautiful and enduring. It was not the fairy tale Emma had dreamed of as a girl, but it was better because it was real. It was hard work and compromise and choosing each other every single day. It was late-night conversations and shared laughter and passionate kisses stolen in quiet moments. It was building a life together, board by board, day by day, until it became something solid and wonderful. They returned to the ranch rejuvenated and more in love than ever. Their children greeted them with squeals of delight and stories about everything that had happened while they were gone. Emma scooped up her youngest daughter and breathed in the sweet scent of her hair, feeling gratitude wash over her. This was her life. This was her family, and she would not trade it for anything in the world. The years continued to pass, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. Thomas Quinn died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 75, and Grant wept at the funeral for the man who had been more of a father to him than his own blood. Sarah followed 3 years later, and Emma mourned the loss of the woman who had taken her in and taught her how to thrive in this harsh, beautiful land. But there were joys, too. Will grew into a fine young man who married a schoolteacher from Silver City and started his own ranch on land that Thomas had left to Grant in his will. Eliza became a teacher herself, refusing several marriage proposals before finally accepting the suit of a doctor who saw her as an equal partner. The younger children found their own paths, some staying in Arizona and others venturing out to seek their fortunes elsewhere, but all of them carrying with them the values Emma and Grant had instilled: hard work, integrity, and the importance of choosing your own path. Emma and Grant grew old together, their hair turning silver, their bodies marked by years of hard work and the passage of time. But their love never dimmed. If anything, it grew stronger, deepened by decades of shared experiences and mutual respect. They knew each other better than they knew themselves, could communicate with a glance, and still found joy in each other's company. On a warm spring evening in 1912, 30 years after they had first met on that dusty stagecoach, Emma and Grant sat together on the porch of their home, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Will's oldest son was teaching his younger cousins to rope a fence post, and their laughter rang out clear and sweet in the evening air. "We did all right, did we not?" Grant said, his arm around Emma's shoulders. "Look at all this. All these people who exist because you were brave enough to trust a stranger." Emma leaned into her husband's warmth, feeling completely content. "We did better than all right," she said. "We built something good, Grant, something worth having." "Something worth fighting for," Grant agreed. He pressed a kiss to her temple, and Emma smiled, remembering all the kisses that had come before, all the moments of tenderness and passion and quiet companionship. "I love you," Emma said, the words as easy and natural as breathing after 3 decades of marriage. "I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Grant replied. "You are my heart, Emma Quincy. You always have been and you always will be." They sat together as the sun set over the Arizona landscape they had claimed as home, surrounded by the legacy of their love. It was not the life Emma had been promised all those years ago. It was not the life anyone had planned for her. But it was the life she had chosen, and it was perfect. Years later, when people asked Emma about her life, about how she had come to Arizona and built such a remarkable family, she would smile and say simply that she had been blessed. Blessed to meet a good man who had offered her a different kind of marriage. Blessed to have the courage to take that chance. Blessed to discover that sometimes the best things in life are the ones you never see coming. And if they pressed her for details, she would tell them the story of a frightened girl and a cowboy with a gray-green gaze and a heart full of old wounds. She would tell them about forged papers and a brave rescue, about a marriage of convenience that became a love story for the ages. She would tell them about building a life in the harsh beauty of the Arizona territory, about raising children and weathering storms and finding joy in the simple, everyday moments. But most of all, she would tell them about love. Real love, the kind that grows slowly and surely, rooted in respect and partnership, and the choice to keep choosing each other, day after day, year after year. The kind of love that transforms 2 strangers into soulmates, that builds families and legacies and lives worth living. That was the story of Emma and Grant Quincy, and it was a good one. Not because it was perfect, but because it was true. They had started with fear and necessity and a desperate leap of faith. They had built something beautiful out of those shaky foundations. And they had loved each other well and truly until their very last days, leaving behind a legacy of children and grandchildren who carried their story forward into the future. It was, Emma thought as she took her last breath many years later with Grant's hand in hers, exactly the life she was meant to live. Not the life she was promised to, but the life she chose. And that made all the difference.